everything. We'll start with lighting our chalice. So if you have a chalice or a candle handy, it's a nice way to create some sacred space as we enter into this community time. We come together with our tired minds and bodies, with our confusion and questions, our uncertainties and fears. We come together with our hopes, with our past, with our ideas, our passion, and our faith. We come together bringing all of who we are, trusting that in gathering we will be renewed, and that together we can create the world we long for. You want to just share your light if you have it. Could all use extra light this time of year. It's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Donley, our facilitator this morning. Rebecca began her work in the field of domestic violence support over 20 years ago. She has provided trainings on intimate partner violence on the local, state, and national levels. She has spent thousands of hours holding space for survivors as a crisis line advocate for various hotlines. Rebecca has also trained and supported survivor advocates and other service providers. She currently organizes the project Community Advocates Creating Healing Everywhere, known as CASH, to support community members in building trauma-informed advocacy skills to support survivors and their families. It's so lovely to have you with us, and we so appreciate you spending time with us this morning, Rebecca, and sharing your insights and knowledge and learnings with us.
Thank you so much, Katie, and Dallas, for getting things started. Again, as I'm sharing my screen, I won't be able to see the chat or if folks are raising hands. So Dallas will be watching that. But yeah, just let us know if there's something that you've posted and haven't gotten a response. Yeah,
you can submit a question either via chat, or if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand and then we'll let you know when you're called on. Thanks.
Perfect. Wonderful. But yeah, just a very big thank you to everybody who showed up today. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be sharing this info with y'all. And I also just want to say, these conversations, sometimes they bring up things that we don't expect. So know that it's absolutely okay to go off camera. If you need to step back for a moment, if you need to hop out of the Zoom and hop back in, like that's absolutely okay. Take care of yourself and notice, what you're holding, and know that it's all part of this process. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and see if this works. We did do a test and it seemed to go well. So, all right. Perfect. I'm just going to make this big. And I just want to also send a thank you to the person who designed this really lovely Supporting Abuse Survivors badge that we have in the center of the screen. This was from training that I did for Badass Cross Stitch, which is a crafting group that also has a series called How to Be a Good Human. And they offered an opportunity for me to share these skills through that option or through that training space. And they designed this lovely badge as part of that. So I just wanted to give credit to that. And I also just want to say, so I'm not the voice of intimate partner violence or anything like that. I'm not trying to come here as an expert who knows everything. And I also definitely don't speak for all survivors. But I am here because I built up skills as a trainer on these issues. And I've just really been wanting to share those skills, not just with folks within this field, but with folks who are in community, because we know oftentimes the first person that someone will go to share their experience of abuse will not be necessarily a service provider. It might be a neighbor or a friend or a congregation member. And so I just wanted to share that, share this training as an offering for that. I also really want to make a note about language. So I'm going to be using the words survivor to describe a person who's experiencing harm in the relationship. I won't use the word victim, though that might be the term that you're more used to hearing. I'm also going to try and use the words harm doer or abusive person instead of abuser or perpetrator. Again, not all folks are going to use these same types of words to describe themselves or the person who's causing harm in their home or in their relationship. And when we get to discussing more about trauma-informed care, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of kind of paying attention to and using the same terms and language as the person who you're providing support to. So like I mentioned, the big question that I'm just going to get us started off with today is why do we all need skills to support survivors of abuse in our communities? And for me, something that I've noticed is that whether I'm in the field or outside of the field, whether I'm just in my day-to-day life, I'm always using these skills, the skill set. And in fact, something that I realized as I was starting to think about my experiences with this is that my first time talking to somebody about abuse was not on a hotline, and it was not in a training that I was receiving, from a professional person. It was when I was in high school, and I was on a speech and debate trip, and our school put 5 of us in one hotel room. And so I was sharing this room with, 4 other folks on the debate team. And we were talking, as happens on high school, trips, when you don't have a supervisor in the room with you, you stay up as late as you can. And we got into talking about some, really kind of serious, heavy topics about things that our families had gone through and how that we ourselves had experienced. And we were talking about abuse. And of the 5 of us in that room, 3 identified that a family member or they themselves had experienced abuse or were currently experiencing that in their homes. And so I bring up this reminder is just to say, again, these conversations happen whether or not we have the skills and the tools. And so I really want to help us have more skills to have these conversations. Like I said, having these skills have also helped. So I was in the field for about on and off about 15 years. And currently I'm not professionally, working for an agency, but I am still continuing to support family members, friends, and other community members who are experiencing abuse in their relationships and lives. Sometimes it's in a workplace, sometimes it's different types of things. So but some of the places that I've used these trauma-informed skills were I was a elementary school secretary, and while I was there were 3 families that were dealing with these issues, and I was only there for a year, but that came up 3 times. I also worked at a bookstore. I was a bookseller for a while, and while I was selling books, sometimes I would get calls, and people would ask me about certain titles, and I could kind of get the read, like from that title, like, oh, this seems like, this might be somebody that I want to be, maybe listening a little extra and giving them some space, if they need to share something or have a concern. So, so it's something that has just opened my eyes and ears, I think, in ways that, made me realize that this is a water that we're swimming in. And it's something that statistically, we're all really likely to come into contact with somebody who is experiencing abuse or has experienced abuse in the past. But also, we're a lot less likely to come into contact with somebody who has the trauma-informed skill set to be able to, hold that space and have those conversations. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about sharing. So let's take a look. I'm going to show a little clip here from another organization called Free From. And so this is Sonia Passy, who is the director of Free From. And Sonia is in conversation with Jonathan Van Ness, who y'all might know from Queer Eye on, I think it's on Netflix. So this is from a podcast interview that they did. And I'm just going to share this clip of Sonia talking about who is, what do the statistics look like, who is impacted by abuse.
Who commonly experiences intimate partner violence in the United States and really just, anywhere?
Yeah. So intimate partner violence really doesn't have any religious bounds, any socioeconomic bounds. It happens to everyone, but it does disproportionately impact certain demographics. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 2 trans folks in the US will experience intimate partner violence. But within those statistics, BIPOC folks and LGBTQIA+ folks are even further disproportionately impacted. So 41% of Black women will experience intimate partner violence. Up to 60% of Native and Indigenous women will experience intimate partner violence. 1 in 4 gay men will experience intimate partner violence. 61% of bisexual women, 40% of lesbian women. So that 1 in 4 stat for women is worse for women of color and for queer women. And the stat for men in the US is 1 in 7, but 1 in 4 gay men is disproportionately affecting gay men. And then 1 in 2 trans folks. And we never, ever talk about that. 1 in 2 trans folks. We have no data right now on the extent to which it impacts non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming folks. One of the things that Free From is actually working on is gathering that data. Because of course, if we don't know the data, then we don't address the problem.
And so I really appreciated this clip because of how Sonia dives deeper into the statistics. Like when I was going through training, a lot of times we would stop at gender. We would just say 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. And that was where we would stop. We wouldn't get into those statistics a little more clearly to show that, certain populations within those numbers are more impacted. And one thing that Sonia doesn't talk about here, but Free From does have newer reports and newer data that is out talking about folks in the disability community that are impacted and the rates of those impacts as well. So, and again, like as you look at different communities, like again, we see the more marginalization, the more likely folks are dealing with these issues. And it's not necessarily because, that's something that just happens in relationships in that thing, but we'll see that a lot of times with marginalization, it makes it a lot harder for folks to get resources and services. And so I'll actually move to our next slide because this touches right on that. So this is something that we call the power and control wheel. This is actually a slightly different version of the power and control wheel that we use to talk about the dynamics and the tactics that might be happening in an abusive situation for someone. So in the core of this kind of web that we have here, we see power and control. And then we see these different kind of behaviors that might be happening. So things like using intimidation. So, threats. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Excuse me, using emotional abuse. So, trying to bring someone down, kind of cut down their feelings of self-worth as a way to keep them feeling stuck. Using isolation, that might be making it uncomfortable for their family and friends to continue to be a part of their life. Or the harm doer or person who's acting in abusive ways might be like threatening those other family members, or they might just be showing up in a totally different way when those folks are present. And then, when the doors are closed and it's just the person who's, active and acting in abusive ways and the person who's experiencing those, then they might, turn the tables. So then the family has this, one picture of what their relationship is like, and then it's this totally other thing. So that can also be really isolating. Also behaviors like minimizing, denying, and blaming. So flipping those tables, kind of like I was talking about, using that as an isolation tactic, but also, getting the person who's experiencing these abusive behaviors to kind of question, like, is this really happening? Am I blowing this out of proportion? Just getting them to always be kind of on edge, walking on eggshells, not really sure what's going on. Another thing that might be happening could be that they're using the children, whether that's not providing any help with childcare and like kind of making that person feel stuck, like they have to create all the, figure out everything with childcare. Or it might be, again, like using the children, making threats about the children, or saying, if you leave, I'm going to make sure I keep the children, those types of things. So really making that person feel stuck. And then using privilege. And I'm going to put a pin on that one because I want to come back to it in just a second. So again, that coercion and threats, using economic abuse, which again, that can be a really big thing, and free from the organization that Sonia Passy, who was just speaking with Jonathan Van Ness, that's something that they're really trying to highlight and help folks understand, because there's a lot of systemic things that actually like help economic abuse happen and hold it in place. And so there's a lot of structural and systemic things that need to change to help survivors have more access to financial and economic freedom, so that they can, get to safety if that's something that they need to use. But again, going back to that using privilege piece. So all of these pieces that I just described, these are tactics that the person who's being harmful or abusive would be using to kind of maintain that power and control in that relationship or situation. Now, when we get to using privilege, that's where, like, you can see that there are some other pieces here. Like, we're going out, we're seeing sexism, heterosexism, ageism, racism and ethnocentrism, ableism, classism, and spirituality and religion. And these are all things that, again, this abusive person might be using to say, hey, I have more power in these areas, and I'm going to make sure that that if you do try to regain some of your power, that's going to be very difficult, because I'm going to play into all of these different systems to make sure that you stay in your place. You're not going to be believed. You're not going to be heard if you try to use steps to leave or get assistance. Like, I'm going to make sure you stay stuck. And unfortunately, because of the way a lot of our systems and structures are set up, that can a lot of times be the truth, and I think that's really hard for a lot of the organizations that I've worked at in the past, like we haven't found a really great way to be real with people about what that can look like. And we'll talk more about this as we get more into, you know, how to hold space and how to advocate and kind of like find resources for folks if they are considering leaving the situation or just, you know, kind of regaining some of their power. But if we're already set up in a society where power and marginalization can impact somebody's life so much, if that's something, those dynamics in their relationship are also playing into that, unfortunately, a lot of times the help that we say is out there is going to be limited by those same things. And so we want to be really, really aware of that, because that helps us to hold space, I think, in a better way, and can be more validating, more empathic for folks that are like, I tried to leave, but I couldn't get a bank account because, you know, my partner wouldn't sign off on it. And this is a situation that we have right now with our finances, you know, so things like that, those are very real. And so we want to make sure that have a really strong lens around how power dynamics work, not just in relationships, but also in our larger systems and structures as well. So I know that's a lot. I just like gave you a lot of information in one place. Like we said at the beginning, if folks have questions, please feel free to raise a hand or put a comment in the chat, because I'm happy to answer those as we go along. Otherwise, I'll just keep moving. We don't have any questions on this piece. Right. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So I gave you all this information about some potential things that could be happening in this person's life. And I'm just going to have you kind of bring it back to yourself for a moment and just hold space and think of a time that you had to ask for help. You know, maybe you had something to get off your chest, or maybe you had a secret that you felt ashamed of. And again, it doesn't need to be anything big, but just be thinking of like, what was that experience like for you when you were holding that? And what did you need or hope to receive? You know, if you were maybe thinking of going to share this with somebody, what were some things that you were really hoping that how it would work out? And then also kind of the other side of that is, were there things that you didn't need or you were worried might happen when you reached out? And the reason that I'm asking these questions and having you just kind of hold these thoughts for a moment, and it might be something that you write down, or maybe you're just kind of holding that question in your mind and body for a moment, is that it's to remember that that's some, you know, a lot of times that's the place that person is going to be in, maybe before they're sharing or as they're considering whether or not to share what's going on. And again, this could be a congregational member, it could be a family member, a friend, it could be, you know, it could be a neighbor, it could be even, you know, maybe somebody that, you know, in a more transactional way. You know, maybe it's someone who comes in to the place that you work and you have a conversation, you know, a small conversation with every now and then. So the reason, again, that I ask those questions is just to get us in a kind of a framework and thinking about what it means to be a trauma-informed advocate. And again, like an advocate sounds like a professional role, but really it can be a neighbor, it can be a friend, can be anybody in your life who's just ready to hold that space for you. And these are some of the kind of the conditions that I see as present in trauma-informed advocacy, in ways that we can hold hold this information, hold these conversations, hold these connections. One of the first things that I have here is moving at the speed of trust. And if y'all are familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown, an emergent strategy, that you might be familiar with that concept, but it really is about kind of like letting the conversation and the information flow at the speed of, you know, how y'all are learning to trust each other. And as the person who's maybe hearing about a tough situation, or maybe has some questions or concerns about a tough situation that somebody that you care about or know might be dealing with, it's just a reminder to kind of let the person who's holding that difficult thing move at their pace, and the pace that they are finding that they can, you know, have trust in you. And that also kind of goes back to this piece too of radical consent, which is up above, is that they're always the one that's consenting to providing the information, consenting to having the conversation, consenting to, you know, any steps that might be next. And that consent can change. You know, at one point they might be feeling, yeah, I'm ready to have this conversation. And then for some reason they might decide, you know, right now I can't really hold it. And that's okay, you know. And also on your side too, like you may feel like I have space for this right now, but actually at this time I don't have it. Or we can have these conversations in these settings, but in these other settings they might not work. So again, it's kind of that balance of always checking in with each other. Is this okay to have this conversation now? And that kind of connects a little bit too to honoring boundaries. You know, it might be that you're saying, you know, this is where we can have these conversations. This is where they don't happen. These are the times of day when I'm available. This is when I'm not available. And again, too, another piece that I have here is that it's really survivor-centered. So it's centered on the person who's experiencing that difficult situation. And sometimes too, it might be maybe a family member of that person who's reaching out and who is concerned and they're looking for help. And that can also be a way too that you can kind of think about, like, well, let's try and keep this like I definitely can hold space for your feelings, but I'm also, you know, kind of wondering what the person who's experiencing this, like, there might be a reason why they aren't telling you everything, or there might be a reason why they're giving you some space right now, or they're asking for space right now. So helping, you know, if the person who's coming to you to have the conversation isn't the one who is directly in that experience, it's someone that they care about, you can still find a way to kind of center that survivor, center that person who's experiencing the abuse in that conversation and connection. Another thing that I have here is being really embodied and honest. And again, that kind of goes back to those boundaries, like being aware of, like, how is the information that's being shared landing in your body. And it's okay to say, oof, this is hitting me really hard. I think I need some space, you know, to hold that or process what you just shared with me. Or maybe this isn't a great time to talk about this right now, but let's find another time, kind of thing. So again, just being aware of, like, what's going on in your body and being honest with the person who you're in community with and in having this connection with. And then also being really clear on capacity and roles. I know some of the folks here, y'all might be mandated reporters, and that's really important. Like, if this type of conversation starts to open up, to be really clear, like, just so you know, I'm a mandated reporter and this is what it means. These are the things that I would have to share, and these are the times that I would have to share them, just so that, again, kind of going back to that radical consent, you're not having to make any reports or talk to anybody else about this situation without their consent. And so that's kind of, you know, kind of connecting those two pieces. And that can be a tricky balance to be in, because for sure you don't want to close off the conversation by saying, hey, I might need to report this, but you also want to be really honest if that's something that is a part of your role, whether that's within the church or maybe you're an educator or you're a social worker. You have certain licensures that require you to make a report if you do hear about certain things. And then when you're in that place, then you can be helping folks to generate options. So it's not like telling them, if I were you, this is what I would do. It's more like, wow, that I'm hearing all of these things that are going on. What do you see as some next steps? Kind of like finding those open-ended questions. And then from there, being able to, come up with possibilities. Because, when we hop back, if you can remember what that power and control wheel looked like, it's very limiting, right? Like the person who is being harmful or abusive in that situation, they're really trying to limit that person's options and worldview and just their feeling of having other possibilities that are out there. And so when we're holding space for someone and we can start opening up that circle a little bit. Now, again, we want to be real. We don't want to be like, oh, all these programs exist. And then to find out that they, maybe aren't exactly what we thought. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that. But, we want to be opening up that space and giving them some possibilities and helping them to be thinking in a way where they're generating those options for themselves, because that can be really liberating and really huge when they're, feeling like their world is really, really shrunk down. So from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about safety plans. So safety planning is something that, again, anyone can do. We're doing it all the time, actually, and we might not even realize that we're doing it. But this can be a piece of helping somebody, again, generate that openness in their life, but also kind of be real about what are some of their concerns. And sometimes when people can identify, like, these are the points that could be potentially dangerous, whether that's emotionally or physically, it also can help them kind of put together a plan and kind of see some of the options around that. Like I say here, there's no perfect plan. There's not like one thing that's going to work for everybody. The best safety plans are tailor-made, and they're going to be, determined also by that person. People who are in the situation are the experts in their situation, and so the more that they're centered in the safety plan, the better it's going to be, and the more it's going to be useful to them. Like I was talking about earlier, those generative questions are going to be really key in helping them to determine, like, what is it that I need for safety? What is it that I need? Is it a bank account? Is it having access to cash? Is it, having a safe place to go? Is it, keeping maybe a key at my neighbor's, or having an extra phone that's, in a location that only I know about, things like that. Just to help folks kind of identify, like, what does safety look like for me, or what would create some possibilities if I need to leave. Another thing too is that, like I was saying, you want to be real around this and granular. And what I mean by that is, like, kind of getting into some of the more specific details of their situation. Like if they have kids, if they have, really small kids, how do those kids also stay safe? So how are they also integrating their children's developmental stage? And I'm sorry if you can hear my cat, he's very loud. Into that planning. And I'm seeing that we have a raised hand too.
Yes, okay, it's me, Annette. So I wanted to mention too, another really important factor to keep in mind is that a lot of times people have pets.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sometimes people won't leave the abusive person because of the pets.
Mhm.
So actually, where I lived in Colorado, they created a program between the local animal shelter and the safe house to create a foster care program
Mhm.
specifically for persons who had to leave their home due to abuse.
Mhm.
So, but that's another important thing to keep in mind, that and also, I mean, the fear that the abusive person might take his or her frustration out on the pet. So, and then if the pet goes to a shelter, will I ever see my pet again? And
Mm.
emotional attachment to the pet. So that's another important component to keep in mind.
Mhm. Absolutely. Annetta, thank you so much for sharing that. That is something I know in Minnesota that we do have some programs. I think it's through the Humane Society that offer some support, and sometimes we'll have foster families that will be able to provide support and have a safe place for pets to be while that person is, deciding, if they need to go to a safer place or get out of the homes. But that's such a good point, and that really feeds into, again, why it's so important to ask folks, what are your biggest priorities or your biggest concerns, because that can help identify, if it is the pet that's keeping them from, feeling like it's a safe situation that they can leave. So absolutely, thank you for bringing that up. And again, that's another example of being really granular, is of knowing, what are the resources that help folks to find a safe place for their pets. And so the next thing I have here is do your homework. So there are a lot of domestic violence programs out there. And there's also this really wonderful resource called the Creative Interventions Toolkit and Workbook. It's actually available online at the Creative Interventions website, and I'll share that with you in the resources. But you can go through, they have examples of safety plans there. They have examples of questions that you might want to ask someone. And I know right now we're kind of talking about safety plans for if somebody was going to leave, but also safety planning is also if folks are deciding to stay in the home, or if they're, deciding to do other things too. So it's not always going to be around leaving. And that's something that I think Creative Interventions does a really great job of really making it clear, this can look so many different ways. And so helping us to just have the tools to ask those questions and kind of think through that process with somebody. And then another thing that we can do as friends and community members is sometimes we can help vet those options and resources. So we can call some of the local programs, look those up, see if they have the resources that the person's looking for. So like the example that Annetta gave, if one of the big questions that the person has is, what am I going to do with my pet if I were to leave the home? We can help them find out if there are resources and options for, creating that plan for the pet as well. Because it's such a different thing to be able to kind of provide a warm handoff to somebody that you're aware of, to a program that you're aware of, than to just, be the person who's already in this really tough situation and be calling programs and be hearing, no, we're full, or no, we don't do that kind of thing, or that's not an option that we can provide. Hearing all those no's and being in a kind of stuck in a situation where somebody is telling you there are no possibilities, that can be extremely draining and just emotionally difficult. So if we can help take some of those burdens off of, a person who's trying to put together a safety plan, that can be really, really huge. Any other questions before I hop to the next slide here? All right, I'll keep going. So I mentioned a lot about finding resources. And again, this isn't necessarily finding resources for people who are wanting to leave. This might be finding resources for people who want to stay, but just have more support and have more, you know, maybe options should the situation change. You know, sometimes people just feel better knowing what's out there, even though they know for that moment, the safest thing is for them to, you know, stay in the home or stay in the situation. So there are some really great national programs and coalitions out there. There's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the National Network to End Domestic Violence. There's also a national hotline where I used to work. It's called the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And that is a toll-free number. It's available 24/7. And it's something that also is available not just by calling now, but people can actually text or they can chat. So they can chat online. And then the counterpart to NDVH is called Love is Respect, and that's the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. And so that they work with teens and young people who just have questions about their relationship. You know, sometimes it might be a situation where they're wanting to do safety planning, but other such times it's just like, help me understand if these dynamics are, you know, are the right kind of dynamics in a relationship. You know, it can be more educational, and also they a lot of times will try to have peers that are responding. So they're going to be more young adults who are responding to those questions and concerns, which is a really great thing. And again, they're also 24/7. And they have a great website with lots of quizzes about, you know, is this relationship healthy? I mean, I took some of their quizzes as an adult and I was like, wow, I learned more than I did in my health class when I was in 7th grade. So it can be a really great tool and resource for anybody asking about relationship dynamics. So every state also is going to have a coalition. Usually they have both a domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Sometimes they call it gender-based violence, and then a sexual abuse state coalition. Sometimes those coalitions are combined, but often they're two separate places. So in Minnesota, we have, let's see, it's Violence Free Minnesota is the intimate partner violence program or state coalition. They used to be called something different, but they recently changed their name. And then there's also MNCASA, which is the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And both of those can be really great. They often will list, so when you go to their websites, you can see what are the local programs in the different areas that are affiliated with those coalitions. Not every program is going to be affiliated with the coalition, but because they're the one, coalitions are usually who distributes the grant funds. A lot of times those programs will be connected to them just for that reason, because that's where the funding comes from. And so they would be a great place to look up resources. They might not have, oftentimes those coalitions are a little bit more on the policy side, so they might not have direct service as part of their resources. But I did have a situation not too long ago where a friend of mine was dealing with a court issue, and the coalition, both MNCASA and Violence Free Minnesota, were so helpful in being able to get the court issue to be less of a burden on her. So yeah, so those are two great places to look. And then from there, you can find those local providers and programs. They might be shelters. Sometimes they're programs that have more advocacy or more counseling as part of their options. Sometimes they might have financial aid or other types of assistance. So they can be, again, a really great place to start. And then sometimes there are also resources at the county or the city. These, a lot of times though, are going to be linked to law enforcement and the courts. And not everybody feels comfortable with that. For some folks, they might have been system involved previously, or they have concerns about, other issues. So that's something just to be aware of. And I see it looks like there's Anne has raised a hand.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you mentioned that not everyone is comfortable with the police. I have to say 2 times that I have been approached with folks who wanted to leave their home situation. The intimate partner was police.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
then the concern was that there were no resources that weren't going to get that call to his attention. And so really I did a lot of searching before I was able to find something that would not flag the police that this was happening.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Anne. And it's a very real thing. We would get calls on the hotline, frequently exactly like that the partner was in law enforcement or border patrol, or, even like worked for the fire department, or they were just a community member that everybody knew, or I even had a call once from somebody whose partner worked for Child Protective Services. So it was like those kinds of things absolutely happen. And again, it's kind of that limiting situation. And so that's where it's so helpful to know which of these resources are going to be doing reporting, or they're just like, some of the local domestic violence programs even have sometimes they have a relationship with the police department. So it's a good thing to like kind of know the landscape as we are providing those resources. And that's another reason why sometimes congregations and mutual aid networks can be really key. And so that's the last one that I have. And so these might be terms that are a little bit newer to folks. I know Dallas did the wonderful presentation on mutual aid a couple months back, which was wonderful. And basically, just to make it really like a simplified version, sorry, my cat decided to join us. A really simplified version of what mutual aid can look like is that it's a group of maybe neighbors or community members who are just providing assistance without it being like an official or kind of like professionalized type of thing. And I did see a hand come up just for a second. I don't know if
that was a mistake. I just clicked accidentally.
Oh, totally fine. Totally fine. Well, I'll keep going. So yeah, but that's where congregations too can be really helpful, because we aren't usually reporting things to the police, right? And so that might be an opportunity again for folks to kind of work around some of the structures and systems that might keep someone feeling stuck. Oops. So from here, I'm going to talk in depth a little bit about, this is a report that Free From did back in 2021. It was called Survivors Know Best. And what this report was talking to survivors about what are some places that, you would turn to, and what were some of the challenges that you had, and what are some of the things that you would like to see that would make it helpful for you to get the resources that you need. And so one of the questions that they asked is whether folks had ever looked into getting assistance from a religious organization or a faith-based organization. And from the folks that they checked in with, 54% said that they have never sought support from a religious organization. And 41% of them who had sought support from a religious organization received no help, or reported that the help that they received was or that it was unhelpful when they reached out. And so that's that really shows that there's an opportunity here for faith-based communities to have resources and support. I know for me, when I was living in Texas, we were looking around at, finding a faith community and never really finding the right place. But one of the places that I really loved, I went into the bathroom. I had a baby at the time, so I brought my baby into the bathroom, and when I was in there, they had all the resources for the local domestic violence programs and like flyers, and I was like, wow, this feels really welcoming. And I found out that one of the leaders of the church was actually on the board of the local domestic violence program. So that to me was like, oh, wow. So this is an organization that really takes, this seriously and knows how to hold space if it was a situation where I was looking for help. And that kind of goes to this last statistic saying that of those folks that they talked to, 67% said that they would seek support if they knew that services and support for survivors were available at that faith community. And I just want to dive, Dallas, I see your hand is raised there.
Yep, we have a question in the chat about
Sure.
Will the slides be available after the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I will send these slides along, and I'll also send a bunch of live links so you can easily click into the links through an email.
Great, thank you. And then just for my my own request for my aging eyes.
Yes.
Just making sure that you're doing you are doing a job, but every time I'm like, is Rebecca going to explain what this says? Because this is so little, this text. So appreciating that, and just please keep it up.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Well, I just want to dive into that last statistic a little more deeply. So it says 67% would seek support if they knew that services and support for survivors were available. But there's a little note there. And that note says that 65% of English-speaking respondents said that they would do this, and 82% of Spanish-speaking respondents said that they would. So I think that's really, really important from a culture perspective, and just being aware that for some folks and some cultural backgrounds, faith organizations are going to play a much larger role in the opportunity to provide support. Like they're going to be a bigger part. And so that's where it's, again, really highlights the huge opportunity that faith organizations have to be a place that, can be a potentially, an option for safety for folks. And so I'm going to hop to go ahead, Anne.
I'm sorry to pop in again.
No, you're fine.
I worked for a Spanish-speaking social services organization, and when we would have workshops on domestic violence and abuse, many of the participants were shocked to learn that the things they were experiencing were illegal. Because where they had come from, many of them were new immigrants, it was not. So, there's a whole education layer there as well, culturally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the immigrant population, again, too, can be, folks that are sometimes, depending on, if they're partnered with somebody who is from the US, sometimes immigration status can be a way that they are, kind of feeling that stuckness as well, because the information they might be getting from that partner about how the laws and things work in the US can be very not true, and so that's something that's really important that we keep in mind too, is again, that there's another resource that I might share when I send out the email, but it's a kind of like the power and control wheel, but it's this web of power and marginalization. And you can kind of see, where folks are on the spectrum of like where being closer to power or being closer to marginalization. And just again, having that awareness also as we're offering support, to be aware of like where we're at in, the level of power and our positionality, because that can also impact how we have conversations and, how folks feel with sharing certain details with us. So Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up that piece. So I'm going to move to this next piece too, because this is also kind of the other side of this. And so I'm not going to get into all the text here, but I just want to highlight some of the pieces that I thought were really important, because again, we're hearing from folks that religious organizations and faith institutions can be a potential resource for them for getting safe. And so we really want to be aware of that critical role that we play, and also make sure that we're not doing things that are getting in the way of somebody feeling safe. And so that's, I think, something that, you know, a lot of times is an internal conversation. Sometimes it's within the congregation, and sometimes it's also within church leadership. I think there's kind of like a both and that goes there. If church leadership is 100% on board, but the congregation isn't quite on there or quite there yet, that's still going to create a little bit of a, you know, a break in what that reality is for somebody who's experiencing an abusive situation in that congregation. And a friend of mine who has gotten some assistance from her faith institution shared with me how huge it was for her to be able not just to leave, like the place that she went to church was able to help her with rent. And this was during a time where all of the domestic violence programs locally were waitlisted. So she wasn't able to get shelter or help with finances, or even like counseling for herself or her children, or, you know, even just have an advocate that she could talk to because of how full the program was. When she turned to her church, they helped her get the funding that she needed to, you know, get an apartment. And then they also got her support, so she had somebody that she could be talking to the whole time who understood the dynamics and you know, what it's like to be in an abusive situation. So as, you know, things were kind of chaotic around in her life, she had that added support. And she said, you know, there were multiple times where the church stepped up and helped her out, where had she not had that, she would have gone back into this situation. So it's just a really good reminder of how powerful faith support from a faith institution can be. So some of the suggestions that they offer here, first of all, they say before offering any services directly to survivors, religious leaders should be educated and trained to ensure that resources are non-judgmental, survivor-centered, and confidential. And I'd also say that some key lay members are also trained in that and are, you know, brought on board so that they can also bring the rest of the congregation on board with that too. So it's more of a full, you know, the full congregation is supportive and understanding. Some other possibilities would be having free counseling services with virtual access options, creating accountability groups that are focused on restorative justice processes for harm doers and people who cause harm. So not just helping the person who is experiencing the abuse, but also the person who's doing it. You know, if there's a way that that person can be held accountable in community, sometimes that can actually, you know, help shift those dynamics. And again, a lot of folks, they don't necessarily want their partner to have to go to jail or, you know, pay a fine or have to go pay to go to classes for, you know, like a battery and intervention type of class or program. But what they want is just to kind of like have community support to help hold that person accountable. So they're not the only person who's doing it. Sometimes that can be an option. Now, again, you're going to want to make sure that the, you know, if that's something that's provided by the church, that is provided by folks that are very well trained in what restorative justice looks like and how to do it in a safe way, especially in situations where there is gender-based or intimate partner violence. Some other things that could be possible, you know, I know a lot of our congregations are sanctuary congregations. And so the possibility of even, you know, if there isn't somebody using the space that we have for sanctuary around immigration at that time, if it's possible, that could be a safe place for somebody to stay with their family, if they are trying to leave an abusive situation. Also, again, kind of on that mutual aid side, if there are members of the community who maybe have like a guest house, or who have a garage apartment, or are just out of town for the winter, if that could be a potential option for somebody to stay at their place, that can be really huge. And then there's also other things like creating emergency funds to get money into the hands of survivors who needs it, or having a clothes closet at the school, at the church, or a food pantry. So again, just like having more resources that are available to the community, questions asked, sometimes that can create possibility for folks that are dealing with abuse. So again, and then one thing that I also wanted to highlight was just partner with other faith-based organizations providing services for survivors and their families. So you may not be aware, but October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I have yet to see a faith community or faith communities that act together to highlight that and have those conversations. And that's maybe a missed opportunity that, again, could provide a huge, just a feeling of like, oh, I matter to this congregation and my experience matters. And also this is a place where I'm safe to share what my experiences have been, or, these are places where people care about keeping survivors safe and listening to survivors. So I'm going to move to one last slide, or a couple last slides here. Sorry, I'm like trying to remember, like, how many more slides do I have? I think I have just 3 more, but I just wanted to drop this little nugget, because this also came from the interview of Sonia Passy with Jonathan Benes. But one thing that Sonia shares is that 85% is the percentage of federal funding for abuse prevention and intervention that goes to law enforcement. And this could be through, Sonia says law enforcement, this could also be like prosecutors' offices, it could be courts, but it basically is going to the criminal justice system as a way to make the criminal justice system more open to survivors. However, not all survivors want that as a resource. We didn't really ask survivors, like, where would you put this money, or what would be the best way to get you safe? A lot of programs, because I came from the policy side, I know, like, a lot of times we're just making decisions based on what we think survivors need most. And it's not always a good fit, because then when they survive, or when they surveyed survivors, 80% of them said that they would not call law enforcement when they experienced abuse. So if all of our funds are going to these programs and resources that are not accessible or not what folks want, that's a really big problem. And so I'm going to share another little clip of Sonia kind of talking about what are some of the steps that we can take from here.
We are really focused right now on our societal action strategy. So getting banks to take accountability and make bank accounts accessible to all survivors. Getting employers to do their part so that survivors aren't having to choose between getting safe and keeping their job. And getting states and the federal government to implement policies that are actually allocating money to community responses and prioritizing this issue as an economic issue. So that's the next 5 years are going to be very heavily focused on that. And building a movement of survivors who are calling for the change that they want and making sure that they are listened to. Because we do not listen to survivors, we don't ask survivors what they need, and we don't trust survivors, and all of that has to change.
And I highlight that clip because it is, again, so key that all of these steps, whatever they are, survivors are always at the center and they're informing the steps that we take. And I also shared it because as a reminder that even if we aren't directly helping someone or in conversation with someone who's experiencing abuse, there are amazing things that we can be doing, you know, whether that's writing op-eds or clarifying, you know, asking our job where we work. Do we have a domestic violence or a gender-based violence policy, and what is it? And taking a look at it and seeing if it is informed by, you know, what folks need when they're in those situations. And then also looking, you know, at our congregations. Do we have a congregational policy? Do we have a congregational team that works on these issues? Are we bringing these types of topics to our, you know, conversations that we're having with the broader community? You know, there's always something that we can be doing, even again, if we aren't necessarily advocating, you know, for somebody that we're working with directly. So like I said, yeah, because we can start building real community safety together. And I have a quote here from David Graeber, who is an anthropologist, who says, "The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just as easily make differently." And so we really do have the power to, you know, maybe start breaking down some of those outside circles that we saw on the power and control wheel, and also just opening up our world for folks that are dealing with oppression, not just in their relationships, but, you know, any form. So I think all those things, all those pieces are linked. So again, I have so many resources. I know this is a very overwhelming more resources page to be looking at. Just to highlight a couple things, I do have the link for that podcast with Sonia and Jonathan Van Ness. I also have some videos on YouTube. There's a video series called Centering the Needs of Survivors that was put together by the Barnard Center on Research on Women, which is a really amazing and awesome conversation with a lot of folks that are in anti-violence work, but also transformative justice work. And then there's also a really wonderful book called Trauma Stewardship, which is an everyday guide for self while caring for others. It's by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky and Connie Burke. And it really talks about, like, how do we take care of ourselves while we're dealing with, you know, holding some of these really hard things that folks are going through in our community and congregations. There are also some really wonderful trainings available online. So I shared a couple links to those. And then I have those websites for creative interventions and Freed From, and also another great organization called Survived and Punished, which works with folks who, you know, were dealing with abusive situations and then ended up being incarcerated because of the response that they had. So ways that we can support folks, you know, along a spectrum of experiences. And then also I have a link to a really wonderful safety planning toolkit that was put together by Survived and Punished. So lots of links, lots of resources. And again, I'll email all of these links and slides to y'all so you have access to those. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I will put my email here to, so cashfordvsa@gmail.com is a way to reach out to me. And I'm always happy to answer questions or kind of talk through a situation if that's something that's helpful. So now I'll go ahead and stop my sharing so we can see each other. And I'm happy to open up for questions if folks have any questions. Yeah, I see your hand, Kathy, if you want to go ahead. You're still muted. Sorry, Kathy, if you want to unmute. You're good.
My husband and I started facilitating a support group for concerned parents and friends of domestic abuse victims. Our daughter was in an abusive situation. We called, I don't know how many places, and finally I went to Mary Samuels, who was our minister at the time, And she said, well, we'll start a support group here. I'll call Cornerstone. Well, within 10 minutes, she called me back and said that they were going to start that at Cornerstone, and she signed us up for the training. So in 2006, we started facilitating that, went through the training, and now then with the shutdown, it was on Zoom. Now we'll meet, on Zoom or in person, mostly a one-on-one. But what we learned, our daughter's no longer in the abusive situation. He has gone on to abuse other women. And what we found the most beneficial is this book, which I happen to have, called Speaking Family and Friends Guide to Domestic Violence, How to Listen, Talk, and Take Action when someone you know is being abused. And it's by Elaine Weiss. And it's real simple, small. It taught us how to talk to our daughter. And another thing I did, well, she left him after 5 years, and they have one child who's tried to get, joint custody and stuff. And she said he has to go through a drug test, and he never went in for him. So he's now, $30,000 in arrears on child support. And he has other children, like a lot of other children, I think 7 total. And one thing I did do to our daughter when she was still with him, I said, if you ever have to get here anytime, there's $100 bill under my dresser scarf. And that's all I said. And she said, I have a car, Ma. And I said, it's there. And later she told me, years after, she told me how much she appreciated that. So now she's with a good guy. There is good stories on this, but it was very, very painful for our whole family.
Yeah, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for doing that work. I used to work at Cornerstone. I didn't know that that's how the family and friends group got started, but that's so amazing and it's so needed. So thank you so much for doing that.
And we have spoke at our fellowship at the women's group and during the Sunday service. And oh my God, I don't know how many people were crying there. I mean, it touches a lot of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing that book too. That's a new one for me. So that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
I put a link to that book in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Dallas.
And another one, why does he do that?
That one I know.
Lundy Bancroft.
Yes.
He's really a good speaker. We've heard him a few times.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful.
We can include those recommendations in the follow-up email as well.
Thank you.
Good.
I'm trying to form a bit of a question. Listening to this, and thank you, by the way, for all this information. There's a situation I'm involved in where there are 2 people from the congregation that are in a relationship, and one of them lied, and a lot of congregants came to that person's aid. And then it came out that that person was lying. And it put a rift in the congregation. So I'm trying to give you the scenario without giving too much information. But I'm wondering, as a concerned congregant, what I could do about that, or where this situation seems to have been resolved. Both parties are back in they've they've gone and gotten help on the outside, and so the rift is still in some people feeling very hurt that they were lied to. So that's kind of my concern is, what about the people who are affected? Is there something I can do?
I think that's a really good question, Shelley. And that's also very real, you know. It sounds like in that particular situation, something like almost like a right relationship type of conversation, you know, between the folks that were hurt by, you know, by the you know, the person who, you know, wasn't honest or, you know, lied about what was happening. And yeah, I mean, it can be tricky. You know, sometimes there's a role there for that to happen, you know, within the congregation. Sometimes it's something that needs to maybe happen outside, where maybe it's, you know, giving the person who is trying to take responsibility and accountability for what happened and, you know, have that conversation. You know, that could be something that's just giving them tools and supporting them to be able to have that conversation. But yeah, that's a hard thing. And that's a tough thing with,
It is, especially when I'm not supposed to know the information.
right.
So the suggestion you made earlier about putting information up was amazing.
Mhm.
Is there something for the greater congregation that I could put up?
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what works for your congregation. You know, it might be having some local resources or information. It also might be putting up information about dynamics, you know, and the types of dynamics that are present in unhealthy relationships, and just you know, helping folks kind of like get educated in that way, or get resources in that way. But it's, you know, it can look different from situation to situation. So I would say you probably know your congregation the best and know kind of what the vibe is and what might be useful, but also checking in with folks and saying, you know, checking in with other church leadership, with other, you know, lay members, and just seeing what do you think would be helpful, you know, here. Mhm. Yeah.
I have a question about culture change
Mhm.
or culture education within the
Oh, yeah.
congregation. I was recently at a women's event, and conversation went to some women who were implying that dressing certain ways was inviting, certain you know, all of that kind of stuff. And I was, you know, thinking that the Women's Council could very well sponsor some sort of speaker or educator on that. I'm noticing a generational rift there. And I'm just wondering if there are resources you can recommend for, you know, just training or education around rape culture, which I think is often perpetuated by women as well as men. It's what I'm discovering.
Well, and that's, you know, that's we know that with systems of oppression, that it's, you know, people with more power on that spectrum are going to be the ones that kind of hold, you know, the most power there. But also a lot of times, even those who are impacted by those beliefs hold those beliefs too as a protective way, you know, to be like, I'm not the kind of person that would be impacted by that, or that's them kind of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very, again, very real and very painful to to hear those attitudes from people that you trust and care for. And trying to think off the top of my head, like, I think there are some really great programs and resources out there. The thing that came to mind for me, I'm not sure why, and I'm not sure this would be even the best resource, but I remember there was this really great film called Misrepresentation that came out. It was like mid 2000s, and it's all about just, again, kind of talking about gender bias and talking about rape culture. I'm sure there are better resources now. Again, that's kind of an old one, but I think there's a wealth of information out there, and so I'm probably going to dig into resources a little bit for you, because I know there's a lot out there. And I think, again, kind of the same thing, like you're going to know the culture in your organization the best, and your congregation, and what might be some ways to start that, whether it's maybe having an open conversation first, or maybe it's connecting with some of the folks at the local gender-based violence program, because they a lot of times do have these conversations in schools and workplaces. And so they might be a great place too to put together a panel to see if they can provide some assistance with that too. So yeah, but yeah, I'd be happy to generate ideas with you, because I think that's a great question.
I was just going to chime in and say that, the OWL program addresses some of those things. And so, just little plug for OWLs, to getting that information out at a young age is really, I think, going to be helpful in moving towards those culture shifts.
I also think Senior OWL could be really valuable in this situation.
That when you said that, I was exactly thinking like lifespan OWL curriculum would really be helpful with those conversations.
I wanted to uplift in the chat. Ellie, did you want to share about that? I'm happy to speak for you if you want, but check out the chat about a speaker who will be coming to Mesabi UU.
Yeah, she is in Hibbing. She's gone around the world working with domestic violence, and we have invited her to be our speaker this Sunday at the Mesabi UU in Virginia. Excuse the typo, it came out as dis instead of this, but I've heard her speak before, and she is extremely articulate, but she also is a survivor.
Ellie, is that going to be accessible over Zoom?
No, we won't be doing Zoom.
Okay.
We're kind of limited with the small congregation.
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, but she'd be one to invite to do a Zoom for other congregations.
Yeah, excellent.
I put her website in the chat.
Thank you, Dallas.
So I would like to mention one other thing, and that is, excuse me, that is keeping in mind that different cultures have different ways of interacting. So, I mean, one thing that popped into my mind when we lived in international campus housing, my daughter said, Mom, Arabs sound like they are always fighting. So, yeah, it's the sound of the language and also a little bit the temperament. But then also we had neighbors there where the woman from the United States was complaining about the family next door and thought she might need to report them to social services because apparently they had a different parenting style from what we are used to, what we think is okay. And so that's also important to keep in mind, that what we see as mistreatment may be very normal in their culture. So I think we really have to be cautious when it comes to cultures that we are not well familiar with, or religions that what we consider as mistreatment may not be for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Annetta. Cultural competence is so key in these conversations. Absolutely. So yeah, that's something that's very true, and again can be tricky, and that's where that kind of that building, moving at the speed of trust, kind of building that trust, building that connection, and making sure that we know the person before making assumptions about what's happening or how they're responding to things. Because like you said, it might be a cultural thing. It might just be a personality thing sometimes too, and sometimes what things look like on the outside aren't the full picture. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been such an enlightening conversation. So appreciate your time and your insights, your resources. And to all of you, thank you for setting aside this time to show up, to learn, to expand your skills around this important topic. We really appreciate you being here. And we will follow up with those resources in an email in the next day or two. So look out for that. And you can always reach out to Rebecca. We'll include your contact information there for ongoing questions or support. So with that, I think we will extinguish our chalice. If you have it to hold up, we can share our light one more time together. As we extinguish the flame on our chalice, we ignite it in ourselves. Our commitment to our mission and to one another is an unquenchable flame. Let us remember